All right. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our first Stories from the Sawgrass storytelling event. We just want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us. I'm Eve Samples. I'm Executive Director of Friends of the Everglades. And the fact that so many of you are here tonight on a year when we've all been so virtually overbooked speaks volume to the caliber of our guests. And we're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to make a cocktail. If you got started early, that's okay. We're looking forward to some storytelling from Carl Hiaasen and Maggy Hurchalla, and hope you'll learn a little bit more about the Everglades in the process. So the reason we're hosting this event is because we created a new group called Marjorie's Circle this year, and it's inspired by the legacy of our founder, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, kind of the original badass of Everglades environmentalists, and certainly the greatest folk hero in Florida environmental history. And we created a group this year to extend her legacy beyond the first 51 years of our organization's founding. She created Friends of the Everglades in 1969. So tonight we're here to say thank you to those of you who are members of Marjorie's Circle, and we want to have a little fun while we're at it. So before I get started making a cocktail, I just want to have a couple quick housekeeping notes. Seems like everybody's doing a great job with the mute. We appreciate that. If you're muted, if you can stay muted, that would be wonderful so we can hear everyone. If you have questions for Carl and Maggy, put them in the chat and we'll have time for a little Q&A later. And apart from that, if you want to see the speaker, if you go to the top right corner of your Zoom and click view, you'll see that you can see the main speaker larger, or you can just look at all of everyone's beautiful faces. That's fine too. All right, so now I want to introduce our guests. Maggy Hurchalla. Maggy, can you wave? Maggy Hurchalla is a member of the Everglades Hall of Fame, a former Martin County Commissioner. She's a storyteller extraordinaire, and she also happens to turn 80 this month. I hope she doesn't mind me saying, because she can still leave me in her wake in a kayak any day of the week. So Maggy, thank you for joining us tonight. And I'd also like to introduce Carl Hiaasen, who is a novelist, a columnist for the Miami Herald. He pokes fun at polluters in his novels, and he holds his feet to the fire in his columns. He's a friend of the Everglades in the loose sense, and we're really thrilled to have you here tonight, Carl. Thanks for joining us. All right, so before I hand it to Carl and Maggy for some storytelling, I'm gonna kick it over to Phil Cushlin, who's the president of the board of Friends of the Everglades, and he's gonna welcome you all tonight. Phil, off to you.
Thanks, Eve. And I hope the connection here is okay. It was a little glitchy there on my end for a second, but thanks again for hosting this virtual event. And of course, thanks to Carl and Maggy for making the time to regale us with some of their stories from the Sawgrass. And thanks to everyone who's participating here online. This is an awesome turnout, and very special thanks to any of the 31 founding members of our Marjorie Circle program who might be tuned in to, this evening. And we're so happy to be able to connect with you, albeit virtually. And I just want to say a little bit more about that program for anyone here who might not be aware of it or might be hearing about it for the first time at this event. From the very beginning, Marjorie founded Friends of the Everglades to be a grassroots organization. And we've been able to have really an outsized impact on Everglades restoration, in large part by tapping into a large, broad base of friends and supporters. And so we've always been trying to grow our group of friends, and anyone can go and sign up for free on our website, everglades.org, and follow us on social media to stay in the loop with what's happening and what we're working on, and get things like our newsletter and action alerts for petitions or public comments or meetings as those things come up. Last year was our 50th anniversary, and after that, we really started thinking about how we could connect better with our supporters and get them more involved at sort of the next level, and help them to learn about the issues more in depth, and also get to know us in a more personal way. And that's really what led to the formation this year of the Marjorie Circle program. So the program works a lot like the sustaining supporter memberships at PBS or NPR, if you're familiar with those. It's a monthly recurring donation of $100, and it comes with a slew of benefits and special access for members. And so some of the benefits are things like a mangrove tree planted in your honor. We send you a Marjorie Circle trophy, and you get special recognition in our annual report and in social media. But really the special part of this program is going to be the access that members have, and the chance to build closer relationship with some of our biggest supporters. We look back at our donor list for friends over the years, and we have some people who have given to us every single year for 10, 20 years. And this is really a way for us to give people more access and sort of solidify those relationships, and also give us a framework to build relationships with new supporters. So Marjorie Circle members will have access to special events like this cocktail hour tonight, to digital policy briefings where we can do kind of deep dives on current issue and answer questions you might have, and hopefully give clarity on some subjects that can sometimes be really complicated or have a lot of different interests involved, or just be really hard to distill down if you're not following what's happening sort of every day. Next year, when it's safe for us to get together in person again, members will have access to exclusive Marjorie Circle events, and we can meet in person and enjoy the outdoors, and of course have special Everglades experiences. And we're really looking forward to that part of the program. We have a lot of great ideas for next year, things like tours of the stormwater treatment marshes, swamp hikes, kayak trips, full moon bike rides out at Shark Valley. And these are the kinds of events we're really excited about because there's no better way to get supporters to really appreciate what we're doing and what we're working towards, and to turn them from being supporters into full-blown Everglades advocates than to get them out there and really experiencing what we're working so hard to save. So we're aiming for 50 founding members of Marjorie Circle. We still have 19 spots still open for that as a founding member. If you haven't joined, check out everglades.org, sign up as a friend to receive our newsletter and action alerts, and check out the Marjorie Circle program and see if it's a fit for you, or maybe it would be a great gift for a friend or a family member over the holidays. Or if you know anyone you think might be interested in joining, obviously you can send them the info, but also reach out to us and put us in touch with them. And like Marjorie, we're always very happy to go and talk to anyone about saving the Everglades. So that's the rundown of Marjorie Circle and kind of what this program is all about. And again, I just want to thank everyone for being here today, because it really is through the support of our friends and our donors that we're able to have a real impact on Everglades restoration. And we really do need that now as much as ever. So thanks again, and enjoy this evening of storytelling.
Thanks, Phil. I think that's well put, because we noticed after COVID struck that the polluters and the folks who want to do harm to our natural systems did not take a break. In fact, in some ways, I think they geared up. So our work is as important as ever. So thanks for that. In that vein, we're going to move on to the fun part of the evening. And it's quite fitting that we're honoring Marjorie Stoneman Douglas with storytelling and cocktails, because she happened to really like both. So I'm going to bring my personal bartender in here. I think this event was billed as me making the cocktail, but Scott's actually going to be making it. So if you have your Sawgrass sipper recipe, what you have to make, and Scott's a bit taller than me, so this is going to be tricky. You have 2 ounces of bourbon, you have 1 ounce of Aperol, you top it with ice and spiced orange ginger beer, garnish with a rosemary sprig and orange. So that's our Sawgrass sipper, special for this event. And while he's doing that, I'm just going to say a few words about how Marjorie Stoneman Douglas resonated personally with me this year. So I joined Friends of the Everglades in February, and I happened to be down in Key West as I was deciding to accept this position. And I went into Books and Books in Key West. If any of you have been there, it's a great independent bookstore. And I bought Marjorie's autobiography, Voice of the River. And I read about how she survived the 1918 flu pandemic. I read about how she was divorced young, and the scandal that came with that was really intense. She had mental health struggles. She lived through 2 world wars. She fought polluters her whole life. And I just really wondered how she had the endurance, if it was something innate in her spirit to get through that. And then I learned that she had 2 ounces of scotch every night. So I think that that actually had a lot to do with her fortitude. And certainly her love of the outdoors and her connection with the people of Florida was huge. So I think we timed that pretty well. I have my cocktail ready. I'm going to raise a glass to Marjorie, and I'm going to hand it over to Carl Hiaasen, who I hope will tell us a bit about his connection to the Everglades and how Marjorie influenced him. So cheers, Carl.
I wish I was drinking that. I didn't look that far ahead. I only met Marjorie one time. I was a young reporter at the Herald, and of course her background was journalism, and she was an icon, and I wish I could say how old she was when I met her, but it was she was incredibly feisty. We went to her home in Coconut Grove, and there was a presentation of an award, and I had to get up and speak, and then she got up and speak. But I just remember her being so formidable, not a large person, but you could see where you wouldn't want to cross her. And she was just as fiery and just as intense and as eloquent about it as she was when she wrote River of Grass. And of course, I'm not sure. I think she had some rough idea that I was a journalist who wrote about the Everglades and wrote about conservation issues and the polluters and of course the corruption in Tallahassee that goes along with all that. And I think she always had an appreciation and understanding of how that part of the machinery works. It's how the engine of greed, what the inside of the engine of greed looks like. And that what has it made her achievement and the establishment of Everglades National Park all the more remarkable. If we look on it from the day and time that we're in now, we look back on and look at a map of Florida and see how much of it is safe because of her and others like her. I don't know that there's ever been a political achievement like that in the state of, absolutely not in the state of Florida. Maybe not even in the country, unless you mentioned Yellowstone or someplace like that. But we also have to remember that it helped that at that time, developers were fairly convinced they didn't put up as much of a fight as they do now, because the technology of destruction wasn't as refined as it is now. The things they can drain, the things they can pave, it just looked like a big messy swamp to a lot of them, and it was easy to nibble at the edges, which they did. I grew up in one of those places, a town, and it's all, when you even say it now, that it existed, this they call Plantation, which is in West Broward, west of Fort Lauderdale. It was just literally a suburb in the cow pastures and old potato fields when I was a kid. And so the only entertainment there was, it wasn't that long ago, but there were no shopping malls or anything. You just came home from school, you got on your bike and you rode a couple miles, and Sunrise Boulevard ended, Broward Boulevard ended, and you were out in the boonies, and it was great fun. And on the weekends when we finally got our driver's licenses, we could drive out. They started digging this road that we all call Alligator Alley, which was I-75, and we used to fish out there. We would get in inner tubes, and I don't know, we were idiots, of course, but we just floated in inner tubes fishing. And there are gators all over the place, but it would just seem like the coolest thing. You were in the water with all the snakes and the gators, and of course that's when you grow up that way, you don't think anything about it. But I do have one funny story. My friends and I were floating along in our little inner tubes one day. We're fly fishing somewhere on the alley, and a highway patrol trooper pulls over, and he's got his blue light going, and he tells us all to get out of the water. We were literally 15. One of my friends could drive, so he was 16. I would have maybe 15 or 14. And so we all clamber out. We go, what have we could have possibly done? We're in the water. We're not even speeding. What's going on? He called us all up and he said, I want you to look back there in the water, because we had some fish on stringers that we had strung from our belts, that we caught we were going to eat. And of course, it was a gigantic gator that had been following us right down the canal, and we were so low in the water we couldn't see, weren't like up in a boat. And he said, get your dumb asses out of the water. And of course we had the fish and everything, and it was a pretty good one. It was 10 or 11 feet long. it didn't stop us from going out there and doing it again. But I do remember, I thought, I was like, are we going to get a ticket? What is the offense here? Just aside from adolescent stupidity. But you know, now, even now, if I drive across, when you drive across, it's 75 and it's a whole different experience, but you still see a lot of cool stuff. And you, especially if you look to the south and you see the Sawgrass marshes and cypress heads and all this stuff, that it's still, part of me is amazed that it is still there, and because I've seen what happened to the rest of Florida in that time. And then on the other side of it, there's also, and this is the height of the whole absurdity, when I was growing up in Broward and later as a journalist when I came back to the Herald, the idea that they would put a professional hockey arena, Florida Panthers arena, is literally on the physical edge of the conservation area. They have the dike that goes there. So if you're flying over, you have the glades and you have the Sawgrass, and then you have nothing but nothing but subdivision. But the idea, the irony that they would push, first of all, a hockey team in South Florida where the average temperature is like 80. But secondly, that they would, it's almost, and there's part of it that's almost an obscenity that they would think to put it right there on the edge of this incredible swamp. So, but that's Florida. That's one of the reasons I think that it attracts not just as many journalists, but there's so many novelists that have moved here over the years because the material is so, rich and twisted that you don't have to look very far for inspiration. If you'd invented a scene like that in a novel, nobody, they would say no place is that corrupt that they would do. You say, yeah, Florida is all that and more. And I think it's still, though there's still, and I'm just going to say this one last thing, is there's still a sense of wonder when you drive across the Everglades. You go down, I spent a fair amount of time in Everglades City and Chokoloskee, and I go out with a friend of mine in a small boat and you just get lost, and you can literally spend the whole bloody day and not see another human being or hear a plane go over if you're in the right place or anything. And you remember what it was like for all those thousands of years, And the last time I went, a friend of mine took me into this, it was a dead mangrove forest. Hurricane Andrew had killed a vast mangrove forest in this tiny bay in the 10,000 Islands. And I know the name of it, I'm not going to say it, but it's an incredible, you have to kind of claw your way through the mangroves in a boat to even get into this bay. And it opens up and it looks like something out of Game of Thrones, all these misshapen dead mangroves. And most of them have fallen down at this point, but there's enough of them standing that it's kind of eerie. And if you can make your way through that, and you can in a small skiff, we got up to this tiny little creek, tiny little opening in the mangroves after a long trek through the dead forest. And everywhere we went, it opened up into a bay, and you looked out and all you saw were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of baby tarpon about this big, rolling just like big giant tarpon do. It was a nursery. And these fish stay there for 5 or 6 years and then move through the mangroves out into the Gulf of Mexico and out along the shoreline there of that west coast. And you think that cycle is, that can even be happening with everything else that's going on in Florida and all the development that we've had. And there's 22 million souls living here now. The fact that you can still find a place like that and just sit and watch this happen, as far as the eye could see, these beautiful fish are all going to grow up to be 150 pounds, but they're this big. It's pretty damn cool. And it also is inspirational in the sense when you think the fight is over, or there are days when the fight's not going your way, you have to remember that that's out there. There's lots of places like that. And you just have to remember what, that Marjorie fought tooth and nail till the day she passed away. And I think that's a moral obligation for all of us, whether you're a lifelong Floridian or whether you're new here.
I think that's well put, Carl. And before I hand it over to Maggie, I just want to ask you if you intentionally use your novels to help people care about the Everglades more, because the Everglades are almost like a character in so many of your books. Is that intentional, or did it just happen?
Well, I think that Florida is more than a setting. It is a character in all the novels. And I think I couldn't write the books that I write if it weren't for having my experiences in Florida. But it's not a deliberate thing, but I do try to paint a picture of something that's worth fighting for. because the characters are always fighting for that, or some of them are. And then, and I also think it's also psychotherapy. I just have to, have to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like an obligation.
That's well put. And I mean, Marjorie used storytelling, right, to help people care about the natural.
The pictures, the pictures that she painted in that novel were revolutionary. Nobody had written about a swamp like that before. It's a big, giant, moving river, but to most of us, it is swampy. And she made it majestic, which it is. And the trick for all the rest of our generations is to not let people forget that.
Well put. And Maggie is one of the people who has actually walked across that big swamp. And I believe you're going to tell us a story about that, Maggie. I'll hand it over to you.
Once upon a time, about 100 years ago, the ox woman walked from Homestead to Chokoloskee. Now, what had happened is three sisters who were taller than my sister and myself, who were both 6'1", had come to Florida. One of them lived over in Chokoloskee. She was called Big Sis. And the other one was called the Ox Woman, and she lived in Homestead. She had come down because her husband had been hung for murder somewhere up in the South. And she had cut railroad ties and done all sorts of things on the way down. But here she is in Homestead. It's a dry April. And she hears, I don't know how she hears, that her sister, Big Sis, over in Chokoloskee needs her. And so she sets out and walks across the Everglades. She had, according to the story, 2 scrawny oxen and 2 scrawny dogs. And they walked from Homestead to Chokoloskee. Well, my sister, sometime in 1988, read this story, and she decided we should walk across the Everglades. And she arranged it all. She got the backcountry permits. Janny was coming. Jim Reagan was coming. My niece Hunter was coming. And my brother Mark and I were coming. Well, Janny was running for state's attorney that year, so she dropped out to make a speech to the Cuban Bar Association. Taryn dropped out to go do a model shoot in Jamaica. Jim Reagan dropped out for some other reason. And Mark and I ended up walking across the Everglades. We got dropped off on the road to Flamingo. And just about at the last Pine Island, at the edge of the last Pine Island, we set out to go from there to the Shark Valley Tower on the Tamiami Trail. The first thing we ran into was Pinnacle Rock. You really don't want to run into Pinnacle Rock. You certainly don't want to fall on Pinnacle Rock. It is the eroded rim of the Everglades. It is sharp, crumbling limestone with little pockets in it that were the last pieces of dampness in the Everglades that dry April, and they were full of wildflowers. There were little white clouds in the sky, and all the world was beautiful. Except this was supposedly the driest April in the history of Florida. And we kept walking, and we got to Sawgrass, and we were kicking dust in the gray marl. There wasn't any water. We did not intend to run out of water that soon, but we'd brought our little iodine tablets along with us. We had to dig for water in Shark Valley Slough in the Sawgrass. It was Gunga Din water. It was crawling and it stunk. But of all the drinks I've drunk, I'm gratefulest to one from Gunga Din. Actually, it didn't stink. It was just very gray from the gray marl and didn't taste good from the iodine, but we had plenty of water. And we walked on through the Sawgrass. I have one strong recommendation for walking through Sawgrass, which is to walk behind my brother, Mark. Mark is tall and broad-shouldered, and if you can't walk behind Mark, you probably want to get an elephant or a bulldozer to walk behind 6-foot Sawgrass. But we got through this relatively dry Sawgrass, and we got out to the part where it's all sky, and the little clouds are flying down the blue sky. The little tree islands are flying down the Sawgrass. And we walked and we walked and we rested and we walked. And toward the end of the day, I declared that my feet hurt and it was time to stop. And there was a nice island right there. And Mark said, not yet. And I said, my feet hurt. And he walked into the island. He came back and he said, no. And I said, yes. He said, it's a buzzard roost. So we did not stop at that island. We went on till we found a scrubby little place with some willows and some wax myrtle. And there's a thing about Reno wilderness expeditions. Let's see, we had with us an old compass, a 20-year-old USGS map, a couple of bedrolls. We didn't have a tent. This was the driest April in history. Everybody knows April is dry. And we also had a bottle of wine and a frozen beef stew. So we set up camp, such as it was, and we had our hot beef stew, and we drank the bottle of wine, and we crawled into our bedrolls, and we went to sleep. And 2 hours later, all hell broke loose. What had been the driest April in the history of Florida, in the space of, I think, between 8 o'clock and midnight, turned into a normal April as far as rainfall was concerned. And the thing about the Everglades is it's all sky. There was heat lightning all the way around us. There were thunderbolts and lightning all above the sky above us. There was torrential rain pouring down on us. And it went on, and finally it stopped. And finally we wetly went back to sleep with everything we owned wet. And we woke up in the morning to a beautiful sparkling spring day with little white clouds floating down a blue sky. And that dry Everglades where we could kick dust in the marl, had risen 8 inches all the way around us. And so we were sloshing now through the Sawgrass. And that's where I particularly relate to Marjorie, because Marjorie has a story about going across the Everglades from the west side to the east side. And it has to do with mosquitoes and sawgrass. There were clouds of mosquitoes in that story. We were in April. We didn't have clouds of mosquitoes. We had horseflies. If you've dealt with horseflies and deer flies, I'd rather have mosquitoes, thank you. Discovered a wonderful thing about sawgrass. If you lie down in the sawgrass on your backpack, even if you're lying down in the water, you're down there in a hole, you're looking up at a blue sky, and the horseflies don't follow you down. The only bad thing about it is you don't want to get up again and keep going. The other thing about sawgrass is that most of the stories you read about sawgrass, it is, as Marjorie says in that story of hers, I think it's called The Road to the Horizon. It's one of her 9 stories. At any rate, what she says is the sawgrass is the mystery of the Everglades. So enduring, so simple, so hostile. And the answer, and you want to remember this if you get out in sawgrass, is it's not hostile. Sawgrass is a razor blade that goes one way. If you push down on sawgrass, you will saw something much worse than a paper cut on your hand. But if you pull up on the sawgrass, it doesn't go that way. It's a little silicone razor blade along the edge of the sedge that only goes that one way. And so we learned that it was really very useful to hold on to the sawgrass and pull to keep yourself from falling over. And we walked and we walked and we walked and we found tree islands. I actually began to dislike the tree islands more than the sawgrass because there didn't seem to be a good solution. If you try walking through a tree island, it's full of thorny bushes and it pulls your backpack off and you have to crawl and you're never sure how wide it is. And so you decide you're not going to do that anymore. You'll walk around it. And if you walk around the head of the island, you end up this deep in water. And somehow if you walk around the tail of the island, the same thing happens. One of the things the Indians discovered a long time ago and knew when white men were taking 3 weeks or more to get across the terrible, hostile Everglades was, if you know the right way to go, the Indians could go from Miami over to Big Cypress in 1 or 2 days. If you know the path, if you know where to go, if you know how to avoid the thorns, the tree islands, the thick sawgrass, and all the rest. But we made our way through the sawgrass. We made our way past the tree islands. And at one point there, I got the sense that we were setting foot in a place where no human foot had ever been before. It's a really rather wonderful feeling if you like wilderness. The Indians had camped in the Everglades, they'd lived there, they'd gone back and forth, but they hadn't over civilized it and they hadn't tromped all over it. So somewhere in that walk, all the way up to the Shark Valley Tower, our feet stepped where nobody had ever stepped before. And as we were walking along, we came to a place where all the sawgrass was beaten down and a path about 4 or 5 feet wide. It looked like something much bigger than us had beat that path down. But we were curious, so we followed it. And we followed it into a cypress dome that had a deep pond in the middle of it. And we kind of peeked in very politely. And in the trees, every wading bird in the world was there, because that's where the water was. And in the water, every alligator in the world was there. And we quietly backed away and walked on. And we got to the point, complete with our old compass. And it's very hard to keep a straight line when you are wobbling around these long tree islands. So as again, is frequent in my family's adventures, we had no idea where we were until we got close enough we could see the light on the Shark Valley Tower. And late in the afternoon, Mark said, you know, there's a full moon tonight. We could just keep walking and it's only a couple of more hours. And I said, I am not swimming across that moat to the tower full of alligators in the dark. And we came upon a wonderful hammock tree island. No sign of civilization, no beer can, no path other than a little raccoon path this high. We crawled in under the vines, and when we got inside, it was a little cathedral. There were huge gumbo limbos. There's a big old ficus tree that had grown up around a cast iron frying pan, so just the handle of the frying pan was sticking out. There's a big old black iron pot, like the ones that the Indians used to cook up sugar cane in, and big old oak trees. And that was our haven for the night. We were soaking wet, but we were tired enough to sleep. There was a barred owl over us all night long who went, who cooks for you? And the next morning, it was again sunny and beautiful. We made it to the tower in 2 hours. There was a log over the moat, so I didn't have to swim with the alligators. I just crawled over the log. And we got to where the first tram of the day had come in. It had 6 Texas bird watchers who were up in the tower and a ranger. And Mark and I walked in, probably looking like Yetis or some, muddy thing out of the swamp. Everybody backed away. Mark put our backpacks on the tram and went over to the ranger and showed him our backcountry permit. Remember, this backcountry permit had 5 people on it. The ranger looked at it and said, "What have you done with the others?" After a little while, Mark convinced him that we had not boiled them all in the big black iron pot, and they gave us a ride back in the tram. The thing about the Everglades is it's all sky. It's all sky and a wide green world. It's not hostile. What we saw was awe and wonder. And when you get into civilization, it just seemed so busy. And we packed out everything we brought in. I brought the wine bottle back. And the following Christmas, my brother gave me a Christmas present. He had our wine bottle etched, and it now lives on my mantelpiece. It says April 1988, Ingram Highway to Shark Valley Tower, because it was there.
Great story, Maggie. I think we just heard the, well, I don't want to say original oration of the Odyssey of the Everglades, but certainly an Odyssey to be remembered. Brought a tear to my eye with that. So we do have some questions for you two popping into the chat. I'm going to start with an easy one, I think. We'll see how Carl takes it. Carl, Mike Connor says, I think Maggie would be a perfect inspiration for a future character in a future novel. What would you call her?
I'd have to think about that. I'm not good at I just spend a lot of time on the names of my characters. I would probably just call it Maggie's the perfect name for her. I could not replicate that story she just told in fiction though. But it's quite remarkable. I've never made that journey myself on foot, but there's a spiritual aspect to it, and she would be a great character in a novel. I think it's a novel she ought to write herself. She's got a lot more stories that I know of. That she's the best one to tell.
Well, we're recording this tonight, so we'll have at least that for posterity. All right, here's a question for both of you from Carla Gottlieb. She says, hello, thank you for this wonderful event. These stories are incredible. Question, what is the most important thing you two think we can do to preserve the Everglades? How can we best keep Marjorie's stories and conviction alive? We'll start with you, Maggy.
Send clean water south. It's something that Friends of the Everglades and Bull Sugar brought together in terms of the East Coast Estuary, the West Coast Estuary, Miami's water supply, Everglades National Park, and Florida Bay. If we're going to have a natural system in South Florida we can live with, we need to find the way to resend the waters from Lake Okeechobee and clean them up and send them south.
Yep, agreed, and we're working on that. Carl, what do you think?
I mean, that's absolutely, I think in terms of physically saving the Everglades, that's the priority. And I think it's very doable, and certainly the technology is there. I think if she's asking is what can you do as a citizen? And this is what I tell when I talk to groups of kids or adults. I said, what you can do is show up. And it's the hardest thing in the world to track all these little meetings and these little where these decisions are made, and these so many water management board meetings, and even at the local level, municipalities. But if you don't show up and speak up, the worst case scenario almost always happens, because the other side is going to be there. They're going to be there with a lobbyist or a lawyer or both. And so what throws the balance back more fairly is when the actual citizens show up, and residents, people who care about Florida. But it's a hard thing to do. Everyone's living a busy life. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. Now you can show up online. You can show up with emails. You just have to let them know you're there and that you care. And it sounds like an easy thing, but I've been to enough of these meetings, and I've seen enough things happen politically at 2 in the morning, and the last item on the agenda slips through. It doesn't happen when the meeting starts and it's full of people. It happens later in under cover of darkness almost. And so I just show up and be heard. And it sounds simple, but that makes a big difference in these battles, because there's lots of little ones going on, not just the big one.
It's well put, and it's a big part of what we focus on at Friends of the Everglades. I want to give a quick hat tip to our staff. Allie Preston is on the line. Kim Hurchalla, who happens to be Maggie's granddaughter. Kim, do you want to pop in and wave? I know you're there as Maggie's Zoom coach. And also Mickey Blumenthal, I want to say hello to. A huge part of what we do is not glamorous. It's tracking those meetings you're talking about, Carl. And I sat through a long one today on aquifer storage and recovery while Allie was tending to another one. And we try to help connect you all with the decision makers in ways that don't take hours of your time. So thanks for mentioning that.
Well, it's a hard thing because it's so, I can't keep track of them all. I mean, and I have connections in journalism and people like you and people, people emailing me, but I couldn't possibly do it. So it's easy for me to sit here and say, do, but just in your neighborhood, where you live, in your county, whatever it is, you have to keep an eye on all of them, because the people who, I don't want to say the polluters, but the big corporations that have an interest in not cleaning up the Everglades, they know how to work that system, and they will have people at every single meeting. And that's what Friends of the Everglades doing is so vital. Just let people know, and they will show, because people really do care. They care passionately about the Everglades.
Absolutely. This is a good segue for another question for you, Carl. Can you touch on the state of journalism today and the changes you've witnessed? So without taking us too far afield of environmentalism, what do you think about that?
Well, this is actually the point. One point I was trying to make, that the great shrinking and disappearance of local journalism is what's a very dangerous trend in this country. It's the economics of the internet, of trying to find an online model for a newspaper landing on your front step, which a lot of papers are struggling with. But the bottom line is that most papers in this country have shrunk. Their investigation teams, if they exist at all, are very small. And at the local level, the most important thing that any paper can do is go to these meetings and follow these issues. And that's what's scary, is that they just don't have the staff to do it anymore. And I'm not talking about the Washington Post, or the Journal, or the New York Times, but most papers, and even some in big cities, are struggling just to cover the basic government, much less these little arcane meetings. So I don't know what the answer is. The answer is having a lot of citizens there with their iPhones or their laptops, letting people know what's going on. There is that concept of citizen journalists now, because the truth is that the payroll of most papers has shrunk, the staffs have shrunk, and you have reporters trying to cover, there might be 5 meetings on a Monday night in various places in Dade County, probably more. The Herald doesn't have the staff to have someone there at each meeting, but we rely on people who are there to say, hey, you're not going to believe what made the agenda at the last minute. That's going to be the way out of this.
Yeah, I'm having a little PTSD as you're talking, because I spent 20 years in local newsrooms and saw them shrink to a fraction of their size, and you're still in it, Carl, so you're living it too.
Yeah.
Maggie, we've got a question for you on a different front. How about snakes? Did you see any snakes?
Everybody's always sure that the Everglades is full of snakes. We walked all the way from Ingram Highway to Shark Valley Tower, and we did not see one single snake. And part of the reason for that is snakes aren't stupid. They know there are things out there that eat snakes. And I had a friend who was a herpetologist who was collaring snakes, putting little radio collars on them at Jonathan Dickinson. He said, and they did a number of rattlesnakes. He said, when we came back and we walked down the path, we would not, and we thought we were really clever herpetologists who knew what we were doing. We would not have seen a single one of them if their radio collar hadn't gone off. They were either holding still, leaving as fast as they could, or trying to camouflage themselves. Snakes do not leap out at you. Well, I don't know about the python. I didn't know them back then. They will not leap out at you and bite you. You do want to be careful where you step. Having said that, you can't be careful where you step when you're walking through sawgrass. You can't see where you're stepping, but you're not going to find snakes coiled around down in thick sawgrass either. So no, the snakes of the Everglades are not terribly dangerous. The alligators of the Everglades are not nearly as dangerous as an alligator in a canal in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah. I spent my whole childhood catching snakes, but you have to look for them. Like you say, Maggie, it's amazing. If there was a board, if there was some plywood or a junk pile, that's why you went and you caught snakes, and we caught everything, including, for a brief period of time, water moccasins. And
did you sell them to Haas? The serpentine?
No. There was another snake farm in Davie, Florida, where we sold it $2.50 a foot if they were poisonous. It's one of the many stupid things I did in childhood. But I have friends who are involved in the python tracking, and they put telemetry, the chips in these giant. Some of these are giant anything over 10 foot is a good sized snake, as you know. But you're talking about snakes at 12, 15 feet, and they're out there. These are experts looking. And they said they are literally, that a python that big, they could be standing and they're all looking around going, where is it? And it'll be at the ball of a trunk of a tree. It'll be under a little patch of grass. Huge animal. Doesn't come out, doesn't want to be found. It's not going to be found. And it's that, but you love to hear people that, you always get a lot of snake questions, and God knows my poor parents put up with enough, pillowcases full of snakes that I bring home on my bicycle, but they really are not easy to get.
Well, and if I could add to that, I think the closest I ever came to being bitten by a snake, my younger brother used to find snakes and sell them to Haas at the Serpentarium for $1 a foot, because he was trying to get enough money to buy himself a boa constrictor at the time. And so my sister could drive, and we'd drive out on the loop road off the trail, and we'd jack up a rock, and there'd be a moccasin or a rattler under it. Well, we were doing fine. We got a bag full of them, and I started to jump in the back seat, and I started to sit on the pillowcase full of water moccasins. And ever since then, I've thought of not just the pain, the misery, but the terrible embarrassment of going to the hospital and saying, "I'm sorry, I sat on the bag full of water moccasins."
Yeah, that's a tough ER visit right there. Explaining it is the tough part. The pain is one thing, but explaining it is even worse.
I have a yes or no question for both of you. There was a news story about a week ago about people eating python. Would you eat it? Yes or no, Carl?
My response would be why? I suppose if they can find a market for it, anything they can do to deplete what's out there and what's eating its way through. I mean, they decimated so many classes of animals out there, from the rabbits to everything else. So any kind of scam that can be pulled to convince people that python is good eating, I'm in favor of it. If it means reducing the number of python, I think we should market it as an aphrodisiac. There's enough morons out there. We can get rid of it overnight.
Okay, we're going to trademark that right now at Friends of the Everglades.
Do I get to answer that one, Eve?
Yes, please.
Well, I think that's a marvelous idea, and it might be a good way to get rid of the idiots. But I would say no, because they do tend to have very high mercury levels. You have a problem in the Everglades with a variety of things that cause methyl mercury to become part of the food chain. And since the pythons are eating the food chain, that creature which is at the top of the food chain, which eats the most little animals that eat the little stuff that's at the bottom of the food chain, is most likely to concentrate it. I understand there are differences in different sizes. You might be able to eat an 18-footer because he's eating deer and they're herbivores, but you definitely don't want to eat a 10-footer.
It's the other thing is everyone talks about alligators like they're yummy. Their alligator meat is, I mean, it's in my experience, it was strictly a tourist dish. If a Floridian had an option to eat just about anything other than alligator meat, they would eat it. They would, if there's a KFC on one street corner and there's a guy selling alligator brisket on the other corner, you go to the KFC every time.
Absolutely. And I mean, Maggie, you raised a very legitimate point about the mercury. We commissioned a study, a series of chapters in a study, and we're going to follow through on that probably in early 2021 to reveal some findings about mercury levels in the Everglades and how it's linked to pollution, including runoff from Big Sugar, who plays prominently in Carl's books and novels, and you know all about Maggie. I want to mention, circling back to Maggie's original story, she mentioned her sister, Janny. It's important for those of you who don't know to know that her sister was Janet Reno. So not just any Janny. And also want to mention about Maggie that if you don't know her backstory, Google her. She's been in the news just this week. An important case related to the First Amendment, in which Maggie plays a central role, is going to be decided whether to be taken up by the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, early next month. And Friends of the Everglades supports Maggie in this case. She spoke out against a bad guy, and I don't want to put her on the spot to say anything she shouldn't, but just wanted to make note of that big moment that you're facing, Maggie.
And I'm going to say something that there are heroic elements to her case, and even if it didn't involve Florida, it didn't involve the issues I've written about, I would say this is an incredibly important First Amendment case for anybody who tries to speak out and stand up and do the right thing. It's been one of the more harrowing things to watch some of these rulings come down in this day and age that we're living in now. So this is a critical case, whether you know or care anything about the Everglades. It's about your rights as a citizen and of this republic that this needs to be settled.
And Eve, I think what I can say about it, actually, I'll talk about anything, but what I can say about it is among my amicus curiae, my friends of the court, I have a joint Friends of the Court statement on the importance of the First Amendment that joins the Cato Institute and Greenpeace. It joins the Institute for Justice, along with the ACLU. It has a list of environmental organizations, conservative organizations, free speech organizations that all say this is something really important. And I would say this about me. A lot of my friends are worried about me. I'm fine. The First Amendment's not, but I'm fine. Usually if you are the central figure in a story that's supposed to be a historic story, you have to be running away from some large, terrible creature or shot at. I'm fine. The First Amendment's not. I really appreciate my supporters.
They, in a scene that could have been out of one of Carl's books, that your opponents in this case seized your kayaks and your Corolla with 200,000 miles on
Yes.
it? So,
then they gave them back because they said they weren't worth it.
I'm glad you have those back, and we certainly hope you prevail. And I'll just give a plug to the website that chronicles this legal case, this important legal case. It's slappmaggy.com, right? SLAPP.
That's right, 2 Ps. Strategic lawsuit against public participation.
Right. So stay tuned for that. January 8th is a big day coming up 1 month from now. So I'm just going to see if we have any final questions here for you. We could go on all night. This is definitely the most fun Zoom meeting I've done in 2020. All right. For Carl and Maggie, I think this is a good one to wrap it up on. Given your wonderful past experiences in the Everglades, do you believe that we have any hopes of restoring the Everglades to any measure of what it was in the past, either in functionality and or majesty?
I think that we can't restore it to what it was in the past, but we can restore it to functionality. We can't keep sea level from rising, but we can send the water south so that nature can adapt to it instead of wiping stuff out along the way, instead of wiping out Miami's water supply along the way. One of the wonderful things about Marjorie was she was a happy warrior and an eternal optimist. And one of the points that Carl makes that's critical is only you can make the difference. Your leaders can't if you're not there. Unless people get out and write and talk and lobby, vote, we can't win. But if you all do, we can win.
Love it, Maggie. Carl, what do you think?
I agree completely with Maggie. The Everglades, it's just impossible to make it what it once was because the big pieces of it are gone now. But there's so much that can be done with moving the clean water south, with some pollution controls, which some vigilance about what's coming off the sugar fields and other agricultural areas. Just common sense stuff. We can do a lot for what's left of the Everglades, and I think it's not just show up. I said that before, but just don't show up. Raise hell. Because that's the only way sometimes you get noticed. And I don't mean to do it in the way that I've done it, but just there are respectable, responsible ways to get up and raise hell without, alienating the entire political leadership of Florida. I haven't mastered that yet, but you guys can.
Well, Marjorie proudly described herself as pig-headed in her autobiography, and certainly you two are carrying on that proud tradition, and we strive for the same. Maggie, I wanted to ask you one more thing. Actually, Marjorie was a hero, and many think of her as that. Her name's on a school in Parkland, which sadly has another connotation. We certainly mythologize her, and I think she lives up to the hype. But what did she think about being a hero? You knew her.
Marjorie did performance art. We didn't know the name of it back then. Marjorie was a show-off, but not for personal vanity, but because it made people listen to her and she had her facts. But besides that, Marjorie loved heroes. And I sat next to her one time at some event down in Miami after a young man had driven off the bridge on the Coconut, down by Cocoa Plum Circle, where there's a 20-foot cliff there down to the Coral Gables waterway. And right behind him, a young woman stopped, jumped out of her car, dove in, swam down, opened his door and saved him. And I said, Marjorie, did you see that story in this morning's Herald? Marjorie said, wasn't she lucky?
Well, I see Connie Washburn, one of our board members, is here, and I can't help but think of something Connie's mentioned about Marjorie. Connie started Young Friends of the Everglades in schools when Connie was a classroom teacher in Miami-Dade and in the 90s, right, Connie? And brought students to meet Marjorie once when she was still alive, and they thanked her for saving the Everglades. And Marjorie said, oh no, the Everglades are not saved. So I don't deliver that line quite as well as you, Connie, but I felt like we had to get it. Thank you all for being here. I'm gonna leave you with some parting words from Marjorie herself. I've thought about this quote a whole lot in 2020. It's one of her most famous. You may have heard it before, but I think it bears repeating. She said, be a nuisance where it counts. Do your part to inform and stimulate the public to join your action. Be depressed, discouraged, and disappointed at failure and the disheartening effects of ignorance, greed, and corruption and bad politics, but never give up. So on that note, I think we'll all carry on. And I cannot thank Maggie and Carl enough for being here tonight. Truly enjoyed it. And I hope to see you all again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck, Maggie.